See there? We from Mobile, Market, all four. Compete. I'm from Paris.
Aero Milk Chocolate Mousse.
Big news has just dropped about car finance. The SCA has just announced a new scheme to look at how some agreements were missold. If you had a car...
France's central bank has pulled its remaining gold deposits out of the US with a capital gain of $15 billion. Over the past year and a half, 129 tonnes of gold has been moved from New York back to France, while other gold stocks were sold off at record prices. The value of gold has more than quadrupled over the last decade. I'm joined now by international economist Vicky Price. Great to have you on the programme again. Vicky, why does gold still matter so much to central banks in 2026?
I think one of the reasons for wanting to have more gold is to diversify away from the US dollar. One reason for that, but also to have basically a more mixed type of reserves that they can go to if they need to, and not be tied to one particular currency, because of course there are so many crises affecting different currencies in different ways. And more recently, the concern really that perhaps the US was exiting up to a point from the world trade payment system, and other currencies perhaps would become more dominant. But I think it's a double-edged sword in some sort of ways, if we can use that expression, because quite a lot of the increase in the price of gold that we have seen recently is precisely because the central banks have decided to have more of that gold. And of course, what they're also trying to do is benefiting from the rise in prices by selling the old gold they hold and then transferring that into the new type of gold with a lot more special markings and also environmentally sourced, which is what is now required under the new Basel III banking requirements for central banks. So there's a bit of that going on. So
It sounds quite a lot like creative accounting, Vicky. I mean, look, because France, they haven't changed how much gold they hold. They've just moved it, haven't they, from New York to Paris. So, I mean, what do you think it says about confidence in geopolitics?
Well, there is a bit of an issue, and of course, everyone now is looking at everyone else, like Germany, which also has a reasonable amount of gold in the US. Would they do the same? Possibly, but I think they're taking advantage of the price that they're buying the new type of gold probably, more cheaply, and they're able to transfer that money into, better use. And suddenly the central bank, the Bank of France, seems to be in a much better financial position than was the case just a few days ago. So there are all these little tricks, but there is no doubt that everyone is rethinking how you're positioning yourself for the future and whether, the world order has changed. And it has. There is no doubt about that. But it probably is more a question of just taking advantage of high price and selling that gold rather than anything else. And we have had various periods of that, like that before. The UK sold loads of gold under Gordon Brown some time ago, and we've been regretting it ever since.
Certainly we have been. Look, from China to Poland, central banks are reshaping their gold strategies. Could this change how nations manage risk, how they protect their economic sovereignty?
Yes, up to a point. Of course, you have to be certain that gold is going to continue to have a sort of high value, because, of course, it could collapse for whatever reason, because there isn't anything attached to it. There's no real sort of forced convertibility rate or anything like that, as there used to be. So you've got a real problem. It is an asset you have, which is not necessarily going to be constantly going up in price, so you're not guaranteed that you're going to have that leverage, if you like, for the future. But there is no doubt that, if you look at a number of countries, I mean, you mentioned a few already, and indeed, some of these European countries are now hoarding more gold than was the case before. They've been buying gold. One of the reasons why, as I said earlier, the price has been going up. But, it includes sort of India, Turkey. In a number of cases, why they're doing it is also because there are concerns about their own currencies, and they may need to use that gold to intervene into foreign exchange markets. I mean, Turkish exchange rate has been, of course, itself not very stable, but, loads of others as well. So it is a bit of a guarantee, if you like, to the need to have something that you can use to intervene for your currency and keep it strong, rather than another currency like the US dollar, for example.
Thank you very much for being with us. Just first of all, on Lebanon, to what extent could the Israeli attack on Lebanon scupper this ceasefire process, do you think?
Well, the Israelis, I think, were probably not consulted by Trump, as so many others on this engaged or influenced by this war were not consulted. They've announced very clearly they do not believe they're affected by it. They're continuing their operations. Some authority, who knows what it is, in Tehran said that was not acceptable. So that's obviously one of many clouds over the viability of this ceasefire, let alone the coming negotiations.
Right. You've long favoured an attack on Iran. Trump is calling this a complete victory. Is he right?
Let me be clear. I have long favoured regime change in Iran, because without regime change, the nuclear threat will continue. The terrorist threat will continue. And as we can now see palpably, the economic threat of dominance over the Gulf's total oil supply by blocking the Strait of Hormuz will continue. So I'm not a supporter of any particular method. If I could find a better way to overthrow the regime, I'd be happy to try it. I don't know what Trump's objective was when he began the attacks. I don't know what his objective is today, other than he sees the price of oil rising, he sees stock markets falling, he worries about the political impact on him, and that's why he agreed to this ceasefire.
So, Mikey, we're going to take a closer look at last week's rescue operation inside Iran. We've already had quite a bit of detail from the White House, but what for you are the unanswered questions?
Yeah, the first part of that rescue package seemed to make sense. So we knew that there was known combat search and rescue capability that was being used in that first F-15 airman rescue. I think we've got a picture of the F-15 jet there. So
that's the one that was shot down.
That's the one that was shot down, and the first rescue occurred on the pilot, which sits in the front seat. The real questions start to arise in the rescue of the second airman, the weapons systems officer or operator. So firstly, I would ask, what was that F-15 Strike Eagle that we can see on screen? What was that doing so deep in Iran, and what was its mission? The second bit of where questions start to arise is we've got video footage here of when the US destroyed their own HC-130J Hercules and MH-6 Little Bird helicopters at a forward operating base deep inside Iran. This is the video that we saw. This is the aftermath of it and at that FOB. And this forward operating base is actually in the vicinity of Isfahan, which is the location of one of Iran's nuclear enrichment sites.
One of the 3 nuclear sites.
Yeah, outside of Fordow and Natanz. Before the aircraft were destroyed, let's just show the viewers what those US assets look like. It's an HC-130J aircraft. These aircraft are used in combat search and rescue, but also deployed on special forces operations. And then there was also evidence that there were MH-6 Little Birds at that forward operating base that had also been destroyed. It's kind of the capability of choice for light helicopters in special forces operations.
Right, there was quite a significant number of special forces operators.
Yeah, the reports are that there were about 100 US SF operators that were flown into that forward operating base. So the big question is, that's a significant amount of capability and risk to rescue one airman.
Is it possible that they were there because there was a threat from the IRGC and the Basij forces in that particular area that might have been closing in on their position?
Yeah, it's certainly a possibility, and we've spoken about the Basij before. They range in numbers of up to 200,000, up to over 1 million on a wartime footing. So it is a possibility, but then it goes back to that question of what was the F-15E doing deep inside Iran in the first place?
Yeah, and then there are the questions also of why the HC-130Js were destroyed on the ground. Why would you do that?
Yeah, so those reports were that those aircraft were sinking into the ground. That was the reason that was given at the forward operating base. But when you look at open source intelligence chatter, it suggests that these aircraft could have actually taken enemy fire on the initial infiltration, which wasn't anything to do with their rescue of that second airman. The HC-130 is basically flying into the forward operating base to conduct a separate mission, taking incoming fire, and then basically being rendered inoperative for the exfiltration.
And they're standing on a sort of makeshift runway, or maybe an old runway that the Iranians had run. And it brings us back to Isfahan and its significance to Iran's enrichment program.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lack of oversight of that enrichment program since Operation Midnight Hammer in 2025. But it was, or it still could be, the location of the missing 440 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium, 90% being weapons grade. So a large amount of that uranium was known to be located at Isfahan, or still could be.
Right. You're almost going.
Discover more practical life hacks on TikTok.
We have just received the first batch of